Previously on Fan of History, Urartu, which is Proto-Armenia, was defeated by Sargon II, king of Assyria, in 714 BC. So Sargon II, still the king of Assyria. His initial setbacks have been defeated. He won the great campaign in his great adventure in the last episode. And now he only has two powerful archenemies left. It's Merodach-Baladan, who is still in possession of Babylonia, and King Midas, still plotting against the Assyrians from Phrygia in the northwest. So let's think a while. This map is not entirely correct, so do not look at Egypt. But let's think a bit about how the Assyrians viewed the world. Because the civilized world was the Neo-Assyrian Empire, bordered by some other civilized states, such as Urartu, Phrygia, Egypt, Mania, and Elam. And to the east were the Zagros mountains of Iran. And there were barbarians in the mountains, such as the Persians and the Medes. The Assyrians considered these people half wildlings. But the true wildlings were the Manda, the horde from God knows where, the people at the edge of the world. And they spoke a language no civilized man could understand. And the Persians and the Medes were kind of suspect, because the Assyrians thought that they could speak to the Manda. We talked about this in the 750s episode, but we have to talk about it again, because the Manda is about to come a calling. So, in the steppes, in the Russian steppes of the north, we have the Scythians, and the Cimmerians. So they are steppe nomads. They have been there for a long time. The sources are of course super bad for them. The term Scythian in itself is very uncertain. It seems to reflect different peoples at different times. But they are all probably Indo-European peoples. And before this time, we've been talking about this since the very first episode I ever made. The Scythians are putting pressures on the Cimmerians. And the Scythian intention is to take the pastures of the Cimmerians. So the Cimmerians have to go somewhere, because the Scythians are more powerful and numerous. But let's meet the Cimmerians and leave the Scythians for the 7th century BC. Okay, the Cimmerians were not Conan, but I cannot get that image out of my head. They are identified with the catacomb culture. They come in two tastes, equal in numbers, the royal Cimmerians and the Cimmerian people. There must have been some antagonism between these two, and they have not blended into a single nation by the end of the 2nd millennium BC. But now they seem to have one purpose. A credible suggestion is to link the royal race with the median line of the early Western Iranians, who imposed themselves upon part of the catacomb culture back in the 13th and 12th century BC. We're talking archaeology here, people, and it's a blunt instrument for this. The home area of the Cimmerians are the North Pontic steppes east of the Dnieper River and the Crimea. But they are about to invade the known world, and the small northern kingdoms of the Caucasus have been worn down by Urartu, making the first target of the Cimmerians Urartu itself. So we have to backtrack a bit here and look at King Rusa's situation before he fights with Sargon, the stuff we talked about in the last episode. Because the Cimmerian invasion starts probably early in 714 BC. And this is a gigantic problem for Urartu. And North Urartu is invaded by horse people. And an Assyrian attack on the Manians is to be expected. So Rusa is now fighting on two fronts. And that's of course the worst thing that could happen to him. But before he can even decide what to do, there is a rebellion in Urartu. We seldom hear of rebellions. Maybe we know about this only because of all the Assyrian spies in Urartu. But there is a rebellion in Kakadanu, Rusa's own Turtano, his field marshal, his commander-in-chief, with the support of 5 of Rusa's provincial governors, seized Urartu. But Rusa reacted swiftly. He captured Kakadanu and staged a bloodbath where he executed 100 disloyal governors and officials. He also took his second Turtano, who were called Ursinu. So both field marshals, and we see here also how Urartu has mirrored the Assyrian system again. Tiglath-Pileser III introduced the practice of 2 field marshals, and Urartu already has it. But rallying his forces after this civil war, Rusa turned south to face off with Sargon, and he chose to deal with the Assyrian threat before the Cimmerians. I think he did this because if he could defeat Sargon, the Assyrians would stay away because they had other stuff to do. But the Cimmerians were going nowhere, so they were harder to fight. So better take the easy victory first. So then we have to look at the Battle of Uishtish from Urartu's point of view. It looked good, didn't it? Sargon turned up with his tired army, and now Rusa had the chance to defeat all of Sargon's army, but he didn't. Sargon did that insane charge and won the day, and Rusa now fled to the mountains. Sargon ravaged the heartland of Urartu, and this must have been a gigantic blow to the war effort. How would Rusa be able to defend Urartu against the Cimmerians if Sargon had taken all his stuff? But eventually Sargon was gone after plundering Musasir. So now Rusa had to focus on the Cimmerians, and focus he did. So there you see on the right side of the map the main Cimmerian trust. And Rusa now pulls together all the Urartian army that is left from their hiding places in the mountains and turn on the Cimmerians. And one source of this letter actually comes from Sargon's daughter, who is in Tabal, right? Married to that guy who was an ally of Sargon. And Nabule, Sargon's daughter, writes a letter to her brother, the crown prince Sennacherib. And we have this letter. So there is the best account we have of this war. Rusa boldly faces the Cimmerians. He thinks that even if his army could not defeat the Assyrians were the best army in the world. The Cimmerians are barbarians. Surely we can beat them. But it's an utter disaster for Urartu. 9 governors are slain, and Rusa has to flee into the mountains again. And Urartu is now wide open to the north to barbarian invasion, and wide open in the south to Assyrian invasion. And some sources claim that Sargon knew of this, that Sargon were in communication with the Cimmerians and encouraged this. But if that is true, it was a really, really bad move on Sargon's part. But we'll get back to that in the next decade. But at some point then, Rusa learns that Musasir has fallen. The great temple, the holiest place in all of Urartu, has been sacked by Sargon. And that is the point when Rusa takes his life. So the Cimmerian invasion definitely played in here. But now Rusa kills himself, and his son Argishti II becomes the king of Urartu. So the Assyrians are gone for the time being. The Assyrians mostly care about Mania. So if Argishti realizes that if he doesn't give Sargon any trouble, maybe he will have time to fight the Cimmerians. And fight the Cimmerians he does. I think we see here 4 years of hard fighting between Urartu and the Cimmerians, but we don't have any sources. So we don't really know what happens. We know that Urartu is not a problem for Assyria for the rest of this decade, and we can just assume that the Cimmerians and Urartians are fighting it out. I mentioned the Assyrian spies in Urartu, and as I said before, Tiglath-Pileser III started the intelligence service. Sargon has expanded it. There is a big spy network, and we find a lot of these. These are Assyrian spy reports on clay tablets. So to be a spy, you have to learn and to read and write cuneiform. That's a problem. Unless you did it in Aramean with Phoenician letters. But this does not look like Phoenician letters to me. Several of these has come down to us. Most are undated, which is a big problem. Some of them are damaged. But we learn of a famous master spy, Ashur-Isua. He is in Urartu, he is part of Urartu, but he is an Assyrian spy. And he sends plenty of reports to Sargon, or most likely to Sennacherib. And in one of these reports, Ashur-Isua reminds the king of his long service. So he might have been around in the days of Tiglath-Pileser III. The Cimmerians go on west and they come upon the Phrygians. So the Phrygians and the Mushki, their allies, now have to face this Cimmerian threat as well. So that's a problem for King Midas. There he is again. But King Midas is able to hold the Cimmerians at bay for the rest of this decade. He is unwilling to assist Urartu. And as we have seen before, King Midas rarely commits his troops, but he will commit his troops to this fight against the Cimmerians. And he also still plans to make life miserable for Sargon. But he will do it in his old way. He'll influence people. He will like, here is some gold. Maybe you should rebel against Sargon. So clearly, as Midas is still intriguing against Sargon, he sees the Assyrians as the bigger threat. So maybe, not maybe, Midas is working on the Assyrian vassals in the Taurus Mountains to make them switch side. The Cimmerians also invade Thrace. That's the other arrow on this map. And this 1000 BC is a very early date for this, so ignore that date. It's happening right now. No, it's not happening right now. It's happening in the 710s BC. The problem is that the Thracians don't know how to read and write, so we don't get any accounts of this. Archaeology tells us something about it. We don't know how many Cimmerians there were, or how many of them, what percentage of them went this way. But these Cimmerians will eventually end up in Turkey, in what is Turkey today. Also, bringing with them the Trirus and the Edones, that were tribes that lived on the Black Sea western coast in what is today Bulgaria and Romania. So it is very likely that the Cimmerians came through this area of Thrace and then brought some people with them. We even find some Cimmerian artifacts in Epirus on the Adriatic coast, which is quite surprising. So the Cimmerian invasion to the west might be a really big thing. We just don't know a lot about it, because in the east they came upon the Assyrians, and the Assyrians are great at keeping records. Finally, someone listens to King Midas, and it's King Ambaris of Tabal. This is the guy who was married to Nabu-Lei, Sargon's daughter, and he finally rebels. So that's not good. Sargon campaigns against Bit-Burutash, which was Ambaris' part of Tabal, and Ambaris is taken prisoner along with his leading men. And I could not find out what happened to Sargon's daughter, but I think she remains in power in Tabal and does work for her father and not for her husband, because he was a douche. So, moving on, Sargon now realizes that Midas is a threat. He can't have this guy just making people rebel against him all the time. So now Sargon focuses on the Anatolian front. He transports people in from other regions. He builds ramparts and fortifications at Bit-Burutash and Kilaku. He makes an Assyrian province with an Assyrian governor. Kurti, who we mentioned before, he got a part of a region that Sargon conquered. He's the king of Atuna, and he is still paying his tribute. So Kurti is on Team Assyria, but it seems that Sargon suspected him of treason. But Kurti was cleared, so he is still in charge of Atuna, and he's still on the team. Midas was probably behind it all, and he has a new plan to make life hard for Sargon. In 713 BC, there's also rebellion in Ashdod on the Gaza Strip. Ashdod had remained outside of the Assyrian orbit, and Their king paid his tribute. Last time Sargon was there in this decade. But now King Asir of Ashdod is accused of conspiring against Assyria. And it's very likely that he was, because other regions were encouraged to rebel against Assyria as well. Maybe they thought Sargon was busy in the north, but Sargon had the time to come here too. Or did he? We shall see. But Assyria is deposed, and Akimetu, Assyria's brother, is appointed king of Ashdod by Sargon, and Ashdod now an Assyrian vassal state. We also see in 713 BC insurrections in Karalla and Elippi. Karalla, this is in Mania then in the east. Karalla had been added to the province of Lulumu in 716 BC. So the officials, they remained loyal, they were Assyrians, but the people rebelled and kicked out the officials and put the brother of the former king, who was named Amitashi, on the throne. But the Assyrian army turns up, so now the Assyrian army is acting on three places at the same time. So some of these campaigns are not led by Sargon, and this is one we suspect are not led by Sargon. But the Assyrian army comes in, crushes the rebels. Karalla is organized as a province of its own. So it's two different provinces now. Dalta of Elippi, King Dalta, we talked about him since the 740s. He's still around, and he has been loyal to the Assyrians. First to Tiglath-Pileser III, and then to Sargon. But now his people, his districts rebel, and they drive him out. So the Assyrian army turns up, they slaughter the rebels, they plunder the rebellious areas, which was not the capital. And Dalta is restored as the ruler of Elippi. And Elam, just south of Elippi, they are just sitting around. I'm sure they knew what was going on. And they are probably, uh-oh, that could have been us. We better not make Sargon mad. Of course, when he is in the east, everybody who is loyal has to pay tribute. And this sort of indicates that Sargon was in the east. So maybe he did travel to the northwest, to the southwest and the east in the same year. But it's just so much happening in 713 BC. So you get, where is Sargon? Who is leading the other stuff? 45 Median rulers shows up to pay their tribute. That's a record. And Ulusunu and Bel-Apladina, still loyal, still on Team Assyria, happily pay their tribute. And despite all these victories in the east, the great victory against Urartu, who can oppose Sargon here? But there will still be more trouble in the east. Sometimes I feel sorry for Sargon. And there's trouble in the northwest as well, because of King Midas. In 712 BC, Melid and Gurgum rebel. You can see Gurgum here on the map in the middle. King Midas laughs evilly behind the scene. Tarkusani of Melid, who was placed on the throne by Sargon himself, he rebels. And Tarkular of Gurgum also rebels. Gurgum did pay their tribute to Tiglath-Pileser III, if you remember. In 712 BC, Sargon attacks Melid. And Tarkusani of Melid, he doesn't like this, he flees to Tilgarimu. But the people of Tilgarimu, they are like, oh no, Tarkusani, you're not gonna bring us into this. So they open their gates, they let Sargon in. Sargon hauls off Tarkusani to Assyria along with his followers, and they are never heard of again. Gurgum is still in rebellion, and I really wonder why these people are rebelling and why Midas is not helping them, because it's not turning out well for anyone in the northwest who rebels against Assyria. And the next year, Ashdod rebels again. Sargon put Akimetu in charge of Ashdod, but the people of Ashdod didn't like this pro-Assyrian policy. So they kicked him out and they made Yamani the king. Some Assyrian arrives to punish the Ashdodians, and Yamani flees to Egypt. The new king of Ashdod, he doesn't take the fight, he flees to Egypt. But someone in charge of Egypt, the pharaoh, puts Yamani in irons and sends him to Assyria. Who was that? It could have been a lord of the Delta. It could have been the pharaoh of the 25th dynasty. We talked about him 2 episodes ago. He is probably in Thebes, or maybe this was at the time when he was punishing the northern lords. But someone who claims to be the king of Egypt sends Yamani back to Sargon. And Sargon is like, thank you very much. He takes Yamani, he besieges and conquers Ashdod, Gath and Asdodimu, other Philistine cities that have rebelled against Sargon. Their populations are transported away, and Sargon brings in new people from the east, changing these places forever. Hezekiah of Judah, king of Judah. It looks like Yamani had a deal with Judah, Edom and Moab to support him in this rebellion. But when the Assyrians show up, Hezekiah is not with the rebels. He is on Team Assyria again. And that's the smart thing to do when Sargon is nearby. So, was Sargon really here? The Epinom Chronicle says that Sargon stayed in the land in 712 BC, and that makes you wonder, why would he do that? We know that Sargon loves his campaigning, but the book of Isaiah also says that the Assyrian campaign was led by Turtanu, one of the 2 field marshals of Assyria. Strangely enough, the passage in the book of Isaiah is the only mention of Sargon II in the Bible. So Hezekiah still has the appearance of a loyal vassal. He pays his tribute, but he does it only because Sargon II is too strong. But what if Sargon died? And what if Hezekiah could find a really powerful ally? Not Moab and Edom and these tiny kingdoms, but someone with an army who would be able to match the Assyrians. And at some point, Hezekiah makes a friend. And it's the Babylonian king himself. It's Merodach-Baladan of Babylonia. He's in the Bible. We learn stuff about Merodach-Baladan in the Bible that you can't find in the Babylonian sources or in the Assyrian sources, which is kind of interesting. But there are 2 dates for this event. And I'm going to go with 703 BC. So that might seem strange given what I'm going to tell you now, but there is an explanation. So bear with me, and you'll learn more about that in a later episode. Sargon goes back to the northwest for 711 BC, and he crushes Gurgum. Remember, Gurgum was in rebellion. I bet King Midas told Karalla of Gurgum that Sargon had forgotten all about him. And once again, King Midas provides no help to Gurgum. The royal Assyrian army attacks Gurgum. And there are 2 different stories about what happened. Either Karalla is hauled off to Assyria, and we never hear of him again. Or Mutallu, the son of Karalla, murders his own father because of this rebellion against Assyria. He might have been hoping to be made the vassal king of Gurgum, but he has no such luck because Gurgum is made into a province with a governor and ruled directly by Assyrians. Sargon strengthens the defenses in the old cities. He constructs new garrison towns. He put Aramean bowmen in the area. This looks quite defensive. And that is very strange. We have seen that Sargon is not a defensive person. So why does he fear the Phrygian army this much? Or is it really the Phrygian army he fears? Or does he fear the Cimmerians? Or is this just the planning of a massive attack on King Midas? We will learn more about this in the next decade. I just wanted to remind you that Sennacherib, the crown prince of Assyria, is happily building stuff, he's administrating things. While his father is on campaign, Sennacherib is happy, doing his father's bidding, at peace. Merodach-Baladan, still the king of Babylonia. For 12 years, Merodach-Baladan has ruled Babylonia. And he rebelled against the Assyrians. He threw out the he is a Chaldean of the Bityakin tribe. And he has this knack for diplomacy. He's united the many different parts of Babylon. And he has been planning for this inevitable attack by Sargon. But Sargon hasn't shown out yet. Sargon has been so busy being at 3 different places at once. He hasn't had time to deal with Babylonia. But surely Merodach-Baladan believes that, together with the Elamites, who actually beat the Assyrians in 720 BC, remember? Together with them, Merodach-Baladan can beat Sargon. And now Sargon is about to show up in Babylonia. Remember Shalmaneser V and Tiglath-Pileser III. They were kings of Babylon and kings of Assyria. And Sargon wants that too, because with that final stroke, he would have restored the empire of Tiglath-Pileser III and even expanded it, at least in the east. Oh, he has made new provinces in the northwest as well, and got new vassals in the southwest. If Sargon can do this, he will be great. But we have to look at what Merodach-Baladan did as the king of Babylonia. The Assyrian sources are horrible for this guy. They tell us that Merodach-Baladan, as a Chaldean, he was hated by everybody in Babylon, and he just extorted the people and were really terrible. But if you look at the evidence from Babylonia, you will find that Merodach-Baladan might have been the best king in Babylon for 500 years. And let's look at this then. The tribesmen, the city populations, they all buy this guy. They are like, Merodach-Baladan, we are with you. Even the Arameans, these guys that live in the countryside and rob everybody, they obey Merodach-Baladan. There are records of Merodach-Baladan repairing and endowing new temples. He has restored the tax exemptions privileges for the citizens of the old sacred cities, such as Babylon, Borsippa, and Sippar. Provincial administration is functioning superbly during these 12 years. And we find that the Babylonians build a lot of canals, bridges, and irrigation systems in these years. One of the major waterways near Uruk is named after Merodach-Baladan. So it looks like he was doing good. We see from the legal and administrative documents that there's a significant rise in the number of economic transactions. We find that this is the highest economic level of Babylon in 5 centuries. There is cultural activity, there is scientific activity, there is later traditions mentioning a fantastic garden that Merodach-Baladan built. Astronomical records well kept during this reign. So it's pretty clear that Sargon is lying to us about the state of Babylonia, and that Merodach-Baladan gets the highest grade as a king of Babylon. This is sort of like the dream picture of what Babylon could be like. And it is like this until Sargon shows up to spoil the party. But to remind you, we'll talk a bit about the different factions in Babylonia. We have the Cimmerian native population, the city dwellers, to which the Assyrians feel connected. They feel that they're their cousins. But the city dwellers under Merodach-Baladan, they're like, well, Merodach-Baladan is pretty good. Chaldeans are in the south, 3 major tribes, some smaller, but Merodach-Baladan controls them all, and the Chaldeans are always hostile to Assyria. Kassites in Namri, I think they have already been subdued by Sargon during his Manian campaigns. The Arameans, they are still around, but they're not causing chaos as much because they like Merodach-Baladan. And there is an alliance between Elam and Babylonia. So lots of forces here in Babylonia that don't want to see an Assyrian invasion. But here comes the Assyrian invasion. The city of Deir is still under Assyrian control, and Sargon chooses to base his attack in the East Tigris region. He secures a hold over Gambulu, and Gambulu becomes a buffer zone between Assyria, Babylonia, and Elam. It will remain such for a long time. Merodach-Baladan surely was well prepared. It has been 12 years, not 10. And he has put a large number of Gabulian troops in Dur Athakara to stop this. Merodach-Baladan has heightened the walls of this place, and he has cut canals from the river Surapu to flood the plain in order to defend the city. So we have a well-defended city with a gigantic moat and high walls and lots of troops, and it's supposed to stop Sargon, and Sargon has to besiege this city. And despite the walls, despite the flooding, Sargon wins. He claims this city, Dur Athakara, and renames it Dur-Nabu. Gambulu is made into an Assyrian province with Dur-Nabu as the capital. Stubborn resistance is encountered in the marches of the river Uknu. This place was also visited by Tiglath-Pileser III during his campaigns in there. Gambulian and Aramean refugees are hiding in the marches, and they are very hostile to Assyria. So Sargon builds a dam to flood the marches, and it succeeds. So the guerrilla is forced out of hiding. The Gambulians and the Arameans, they're all captured and deported to other parts of Assyria. The region is added to the new Gambulu province that Sargon just founded. But this is right on the edge of Elamite territory. So if the Elamite king, there is a new Elamite king because the old one died, if he is truly going to honor his alliance to Merodach-Baladan, he must do something now. But before he has the chance to do anything, Sargon attacks the border fortresses of Elam and seizes them to make them Assyrian border fortresses against Elam instead. And now, during the Great Campaign, we saw Sargon acting like a fool and succeeding. He attacked in a crazy, insane suicide attack. But here we can sense his mastery of strategy, because there is another Assyrian army coming down from the north, no doubt led by Field Marshal, and it is gonna attack straight at Babylonia. And Sargon now goes from the Elamite border region into southern Babylonia. So this is a pincer movement, and Sargon is now attacking Babylonia from two directions. He crosses the Tigris and the Euphrates, and he works his way up the Euphrates through the territory occupied by Bit Dakuri, another of the major Chaldean tribes. And he is now targeting the city of Babylon. And if you remember the first campaign of Tiglath-Pileser III, that some people thought were an attack on Babylon, this is what you do. You attack Babylon itself. And that was not what Tiglath-Pileser did. So that was not the purpose of his campaign. That was back in the 740s BC. But now Sargon is out. He's going to claim all of Babylonia. And to do that, you have to take Babylon. Merodach-Baladan. So long has he prepared, but he is not getting any help from the new Elamite king. Shutur-Nahunte, the king of Elam, refuses to fight Sargon. And without the help of the Elamites, Merodach-Baladan realizes that all his Chaldeans, all his Arameans, all his Babylonians, the few Kassites he had, they cannot resist Sargon. And he decides to flee. So at night, Merodach-Baladan takes all the royal treasure of Babylon and runs away. And Merodach-Baladan is the master of sneaking. So he succeeds in this. He safely arrives in Elam. And King Shutur-Nahunte of Elam, probably a bit ashamed that he didn't help in this battle, offers Merodach-Baladan refuge. So Merodach-Baladan is now a refugee in Elam. And Sargon says that Merodach-Baladan offered Elam all the treasures that he had if Elam would attack Assyria. But Shutur-Nahunte says, no way, I'm not fighting Sargon. That guy is dangerous. So Sargon has now finally achieved the goal of restoring the empire he inherited. He is now the king of Babylon. He started this decade with rebellion in the west, rebellion in the east, rebellion in the south, and he has crushed them all. He has won on all fronts. He only has one arch enemy that remains in power, and that's King Midas in the northwest. But Merodach-Baladan will be back. He's like a good movie villain. He shows up again and again and again. And the Chaldeans in the Sea Land have not submitted to Sargon yet. But we will leave Sargon here for this decade. In 710 BC, Sargon is clasping the hand of Marduk in Babylon. He is the all-powerful king of all of Mesopotamia. And being the king of Babylon is not an easy task. We've seen people failing at this before. So in the next episode we will see how Sargon does. Merodach-Baladan was perhaps the best king Babylon had seen in 500 years. What kind of king will Sargon be for Babylon? Will he be a Shamshi-Adad V and just tear the place to pieces? Or will he be a Tiglath-Pileser III and be a good Babylonian king? We shall see. In the next episode, we will go into the final decade, the last decade of this YouTube show. The podcast is still around, and if we can find enough patrons, if you want to support this project, the Fan of History thing, you can do so at patreon.com/fanofhistory. If we find enough people, we will go past 701 BC on the podcast. But this show will end in 701 BC with the destruction of Sennacherib. But before that, we're going to see a fully detailed Assyrian siege, the siege of Lachish. We will see the epic death of Sargon II when he dies in a fashion that no Assyrian king before him has done. So please discuss this show with me. Do that on YouTube or on Facebook. Search for our podcast. Listen to the podcast. I cover ancient history with Brennan. So check that out. We are on Twitter as the Fan of History. You can find us on WordPress, the Fan of History WordPress.com. And then if you can find it in your heart to give us a show, we would be super happy. And you do that at patreon.com/fanofhistory. If you happen to be in Sweden, which I am, you can also support us through Swish. If you want to do that, send me a message on the Fan of History Facebook page. Thank you so much for watching, and I can't wait to get into the 709 to 701 period, because that is an interesting period. Talk to you later.